Ron Feldt here. Welcome to the Informa Economics Blue Water Outlook River Basin Outlook for September 9th, 2013. Well, last week's briefing I mentioned it is going to be a pretty quiet week across all of our major river basins. And you can see here there was a little bit of significant rain over parts of the upper Missouri River Basin. That area in yellow is about 3 inches. Even a very few isolated spots which are inconsequential for mainstem river flows. This might impact some smaller tributaries of around 5 inches. I think what's more significant are the areas that only received less than a half inch of rain, and that's all the areas in blue, and that's really not significant. I'm going to show you later in this briefing runoff thresholds, and those don't even reach runoff thresholds, so that water is getting absorbed into the upper soil moisture. It's not even making it into rivers. But if you look at the Ohio River Basin, really not significant rainfall. Upper Mississippi, not significant. I mentioned just a little bit on the Missouri. And the lower Mississippi, just along the coast, any significant rain. Otherwise, a very quiet week. That's why when we look at percent of normal the last 7 days, we see widespread percents of normal below normal. That dark red is only 5% of normal rainfall for the week. Now, there's that area in the Dakotas. You can see that there was some significant rain right in here, but that was a very, very small area overall, so it really wasn't all that much, as far as significance, as far as rivers go. Now let's take a step back. I've done this the last couple weeks and sort of look at the big picture, because when we're talking about the outlook for flows, it's not just the short term, but it's a longer term. And this is what's significant on the upper Mississippi. If we look at the past 90 days, the summer months, we see this yellow shading, and that's generally anywhere from 75% or less, so 3/4 of what would normally occur over a 3-month period. Now, if you look at the tributaries in Iowa, that's that darker shade, and that's only half of what is normal. And actually, a few spots only a quarter, 25% of normal. If we look over the Missouri River Basin, what we see here is we see the opposite. We see this blue, and that's above normal, and that's why flows have been somewhat sustained with this higher flows up in this area. Now, if we look at the Ohio, quite a bit of different story. We see a lot of blue. Ohio has also been above normal precipitation, especially the southern part of the Ohio River. It's been drier north. Now, these aren't necessarily the short-term trends. The short-term trends have been pretty much dry all over. But when we talk about longer-term river flows, we have to look at a picture that goes back a number of months, and that's why I wanted to show you this image here going past 3 months. Okay, now so back to the short term here. Number of rain days in the last week, we see a lot of brown. A lot of brown means either 0 or 1. So very few rain days over the last week. Now the area in the Dakotas, up into Montana, you see some green. That's 3, 4, or 5. But like I'm saying and have said, is that it has been very dry with very few rain days. Okay, so let's look at stream flow. Here's the big picture, the 7-day average picture. We see over our river basins, generally speaking, not a real widespread pattern one way or the other. It looks like we have fairly widespread normal type flows. Now, I think of what has been more of a concern is this area here in Iowa. That is reducing the flows. It's been very dry there. And this is the upper Missouri flows, and that is the area that's been a bit wet. So I'm going to sort of focus on those as we go ahead here in today's briefing. Now, the upper Mississippi River flows, again, most of it is normal, but we do see on the northern tributaries up in Iowa, up in Minnesota, that shading of yellow, and that is indicating below normal flows, and that's why we see from on the graph there that it's fallen below normal for the entire length of the upper Mississippi. That can be somewhat misleading because there can be some areas that are quite a bit low, other areas not quite as much, and I think I have a good example of that coming up in a bit. If we look at the upper Mississippi River, this is something that I've been looking at close over the last couple months here, is this shading here of orange and red. This is the percent of below normal or much below normal to see if it's spreading. Green is normal. So you can still see from a whole basin perspective, the majority is still in normal, but we do have a sizable percentage here below normal. Now, one of the things I noticed here is that right now it's sort of holding steady. It's not significantly increasing like we saw during this period right here. It is sort of holding steady. So we're somewhat at a status quo type situation, but I do think with those reduced flows upstream, we're going to probably see that expand a bit. If we look at the Missouri, we see a little bit more of a mixed picture. We see the areas that have received more rain over the longer term, and that's why we see blue or above normal. And then we see normal, and then getting down into the area of the core of drought, we see a little bit below normal. So a lot more mixed type conditions on the Missouri River. Okay, so high flows and low flows. If we look at high flows, just a few spots on the upper tributaries of the Missouri, not much going on other than that. And if we look at low flows, we see a lot more areas that are experiencing low flows, not just in our area for the major river basins, but from a national perspective as well. A couple duration hydrographs. Again, these are long-term hydrographs that show the climatology of flows at these locations and the observed data. The observed data is the black line, and you can really see here in St. Charles at the bottom part of the Missouri River here, look how this has dropped, and it responded to some inflows, local inflows, and it's really dropped right through the below normal range here, and now it's getting into the well below normal range here. It's getting very low. I think what's significant is how quickly that flow dropped out. Very, very quickly here. Now this is the seasonal average, so it normally does go down at about this rate, and look how much it's dropped out at this time. So it really has dropped out on the lower part of the Missouri River. Now if we look at the Mississippi River at St. Louis, again we see that line really dropping out. It's still in the bottom range of normal, but very quickly it's going to go into below normal. Again, the trend line here, this is what would occur normally. Look how fast it's dropping out. So it's falling quicker than normal for this time of year, and I think that's going to occur with the dry conditions upstream. Now if we look at the Ohio River, even though for the entire stretch of the river it's below normal, we've seen this trend now for a couple months where the northern half has been much drier than the lower half, and we can see that dividing line very clearly here, where the green is normal flow and then the northern half is above normal flow. And when you mix all that together, you sort of come in close to normal, but we've been in a short-term dry spell over that entire area now, so that trend, if anything, is going back towards below normal for the entire basin. And finally, here's the lower Mississippi River. You can see some inflow here that's above normal. That's due to an enhanced band of rain earlier over southern Missouri and parts of Arkansas. Otherwise, it's somewhat mixed over the lower Mississippi. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what's expected now that we get into late summer and then finally into fall. Now, keep in mind, this time of year, we have to start thinking about transition. So we're transitioning, not necessarily this week, but we are transitioning from summer into fall sooner or later. This high pressure here has really been the dominant factor for most of the summer. And the issue has been it's drifted from the west sometimes, and it's drifted to the east sometimes. And when it's over the east, we get hot and dry conditions over our major river basins. When it pulls back to the west, we tend to get a bit more rain over the upper area. But the problem is this area of high pressure has been sort of moving back and forth laterally like this. And when it does that, it's really been keeping very broad parts of the basins that we cover dry. It just really has not really broke down. Now it's going to break down in the near term here, which you would think would help. Now it's going to help temperatures, but it's not going to really help precipitation. So that's been really the driver as far as weather. Another thing that could help or hurt, tropical weather is always very interesting as far as whether it might help or hurt. Obviously, a hurricane is not what we want to make landfall. On the other hand, some tropical moisture moving inland can really help water resources and river flows. Right now, we're only looking at one, Tropical Storm Humberto, that came off of Africa yesterday, and it's forecast to generally move up in this direction. I'll just talk about the steering flow in just a minute here. But, you know, it's been an unusually quiet year. There were no named storms as of, no named hurricanes as of the end of August, which is very unusual. And really, we're at the peak of hurricane season right now, and it should be much more active. So if we don't really start to really get going as far as tropical activity, I think we can say there's something inhibiting tropical activity this season, and we're going to end up well below normal. But we need to keep an eye on that because it is possible over the next couple of weeks to really get more development. Okay, so where might these systems go? Well, right now, I think it's dominated by this area of high pressure in the Atlantic, and it's going to at least initially pull north with that high. Right now, it doesn't look like it has a real good chance of making it over towards the U.S. because of this trough here, and it'll probably get picked up with that trough and go up in that direction. However, this high is forecast to gradually weaken over the next 7 days, and I think that might give a better chance of a system, if it does move off to the west, to perhaps make it into the Gulf or even into the eastern U.S. But right now, with the lack of activity, I would certainly not say that is likely. It just might be a possibility as we get into the middle of the month. Okay, so the jet stream this week, a lot of mishmash lines here. Blue is the current early week. The middle part of the week is green, and then next week is yellow. And what I want to point out here is sort of the big picture and the little picture. The big picture is all your energy, all your jet stream activity remains to the north. So that generally means that there's not going to be widespread rain over large parts of these river basins. Now, if we look at midweek, we do see that this line begins to dip, and that's in response to this high weakening, and we get some cooler air in the east and perhaps a bit of rain over this area. Now, if we get into next week, look at where this jet stream is. It begins to lift north, and this is a pattern that is actually very dry, except for the far northern tier of the U.S., and it's really beginning to get into that almost like late summer, early fall doldrums where there's not a lot of energy and we don't have many storms, so it generally looks quite warm or hot and mainly dry. Wanted to mention runoff thresholds. I'll bring these up in our briefings quite often. This is how much rain we need to even get runoff into rivers. This is a rule of thumb. Wanted to show the upper Mississippi, those shades of blue. That's anywhere from 3 to 4 inches over 6 hours. If we go over a 12 hour, it's more than that. So we need 3, 4, 5 inches of rain even before we begin to see significant runoff into rivers. Now in the upper Missouri, it's less because it's been wet, but that blue is pretty widespread, so it looks like 2 to 3 inches is a good idea before we even get runoff. So with that in mind, here's the forecast for the next 7 days. You can see that over large parts of the Ohio, upper Mississippi, and Missouri, really not significant rain. This 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 3/4 of an inch, this time of year, that'll be soaked into the ground, be evaporated right back up, or evapotranspiration due to the crops growing. So really not much runoff, so I don't think, other than on a very local scale, any of the rain we have this week is going to produce enough to really impact mainstem rivers in one way or the other. Now, I wanted to take a glance out later this month in September to see if there were any clues of any big changes. I really didn't see any. I'm not going to focus too much on this graph, other than that area in yellow are the areas of more enhanced rainfall. It looks to me like the Ohio still looks quiet and on the below normal side. And it looks like just on that northern tier, maybe Minnesota. So there could be a little bit more rain on the upper Mississippi, but I don't think it's enough to really make a whole lot of difference. Thus, my trend alert for low flows is going to continue. The outlook, the long-term outlook from the 13th through the 17th and then through the 21st continues above normal temperatures and below normal rainfall with just a few small exceptions. Okay, now here's your threats assessment. This is for severe storms, tropical activity, high flows, and low flows. I have a threats assessment for low flows in the upper Mississippi. I'm keeping a very close eye on the tropics. This might change, but right now, green light everywhere else as far as severe weather or tropical activity. So it looks like a quiet week overall. The Ohio, Missouri, and lower Mississippi generally lower or normal flows, but in getting towards the lower normal range. Upper Mississippi, low flows. Keep an eye on the tropics. If I see any change on the tropics, I'll definitely get information out. Thank you for listening to this week's briefing. I'll be talking with you again next week.